Thank you for coming. I think we probably should get started. We're a few minutes late, so apologies. Bram, are you guys ready for the online? You're sorted. Okay. We'll just have a prayer together before we start. Let's pray together. Father, thank you so much for the hours of the Sabbath. Thank you for the blessing that you extend to us during these hours. We pray that you'd be with us as we study and learn more about how to keep our temples in the best possible working order. I pray that you lead us and guide us in your name. Amen. So this is a subject I really enjoy. It's a fascinating subject, and I'm sharing it because I really believe it's a pandemic of a problem at the moment. So metabolism and metabolic flexibility is very topical. And just a reminder of a few principles for those of you that haven't been here from the start. The purpose of these seminars is not for information alone, but to give us power to be more useful in our time for God while we're here. That's the whole point. Information is fantastic, but health is a resource. So my passion and my desire is that we increase the health span. So people have a lifespan, but we want to increase the health span, our productive years for God. And science is at the place where we understand what some of those things are, things that limit our health span, and the way we can mitigate some of those risk factors. So health is a resource. Success in life requires the best mental health, which mandates brain and body health. So to be mentally healthy, we need a healthy brain. To have a healthy brain, we need a healthy body. We're looking at things which we can do to optimize the environment required for the brain to thrive. So the topic of the day, or a really topical area in medicine, is environmental manipulation. How do we create an environment for the body to do what it inherently is designed to do? Environmental medicine. Many of the diseases we succumb to are significantly modifiable and preventable. For me, as a healthcare professional, one of the most tragic things I see is we come to accept things like dementia as inevitable, that we're just going to forget our spouse's name, we're going to drool and dribble, and end our usefulness on the planet. And that, for me, science is at a place where we understand the things that cause that, and my passion is to say, listen, these are the things you need to look out for. Let's not do them. Let's be sensible. Let's be wise. And that's all this is about. So the earlier we start, the better, increasing our health span of productive years. So that's the goal. We want a fantastic, super lubed, super powered brain. Your quality in life is dependent on the health of your brain. If your brain's unhealthy, life is hard. Very hard. We want to be fit. We want to have reserve, capacity, energy. So this requires a certain set of fundamental principles. The brain must have a non-toxic, non-inflammatory state, must have intact barriers. We've spoken a bit about barrier control in our last few seminars. In other words, the brain has a defense system that keeps it protected from what's going on in your blood. You can't just have open gates that lets anything in. And it must have, today we're going to talk about the fuel supply, talking about fuel supply. So today is fuel supply. The brain does not like ups and downs in terms of fuel supply. It hates that. It doesn't function well with its instability. So we spoke about an intact gut barrier. The first line of defense is what happens in your gastrointestinal mucosa. What's coming in through the diet and in through your mouth is first exposed to the gastrointestinal mucosa and the mucosal barrier. If that barrier is upset, as it often is, you're getting inflammatory stimulus into the body. This is just recapping. We spoke about the blood-brain barrier. The brain is protected by this unit called the blood-brain barrier, which controls and regulates what gets into the brain parenchyma. It can't just have open access to the brain. So it lets the things that it wants through, and it keeps things that it doesn't want out when the blood-brain barrier is intact. The vascular endothelium, that lining of the blood vessel, has a thing called the glycocalyx, which is a recent discovery in medicine, fairly recent. The glycocalyx is like a mucopolysaccharide, mucoprotein type layer that protects that healthy lining of blood vessels create. And when there's disruption or sickness, that glycocalyx gets disrupted. It's one of the barrier elements that's disrupted. So even the blood-brain barrier has a glycocalyx. So, components of health. I want to ask you today, how fit are you? And who understands what fitness comprises? So fitness, I'll be honest, many people have a very skewed perception of what fitness is. Some people think this is fitness, and this is one element of fitness. And so this is the concept I want to address now. Fitness has musculoskeletal component to it. How fit are you musculoskeletally? How fit are you from a cardiorespiratory perspective? From a cardiovascular perspective, what's your reserve? In anesthesia, we do a thing called cardiopulmonary exercise testing to try and assess where our patients are at in terms of their capacity to handle a stressor. So your cardiorespiratory reserve or fitness is another element of fitness. Can you go for a jog with your family? Or do you need oxygen by the end of 10 meters? How flexible are you? That's pretty impressive. I haven't done that in a while, but yeah, that's pretty impressive. So flexibility is a component of fitness. So we're saying musculoskeletal fitness, cardiorespiratory fitness, flexibility. Can you touch your toes apart from doing this? So flexibility. And as we age, we calcify if we don't get enough nutrients, so we become less flexible. We battle to be movable. Mental health is another component of fitness, which is what this whole seminar series is about. But today we're going to talk about mastering your metabolism, metabolic flexibility, and mitochondrial maximization. Sounds complicated, but it's actually very exciting. It's a vitally important subject to understand and get under control. You want a metabolism that is like that, not like that, which is very easy to end up with. If we don't do anything, that's how we end up with a metabolic system that works like that. We want one like that and not like that. And unfortunately, many of us end up like that. And there's reasons. And science now understands those reasons. So we're talking today about what is metabolic health. And I want to challenge you today, are you metabolically healthy today? If you can leave here today understanding what metabolic health is, some of the things that threaten it and how we can achieve it, then we've done something useful. So in terms of a definition, it's more about what metabolic ill health means that's really significant to understand. When you're not healthy, there are certain consequences in your physiology. Your blood lipid profile gets negatively affected. Your blood sugar gets affected. Your blood pressure goes up. So when you are metabolically broken, there are things that happen that cause collateral damage. This is what's important to understand. Yes, being fat doesn't look very good. But the reality is that there's biochemistry behind that that's actually causing you to have very poor health and head you towards the grave a lot sooner. So that's important to understand. In the absence of metabolic health, your physiology is in trouble. So the question one has to ask is, most of us have had lunch. We try to choose well at our place today. We had nice salad and soup, and I was thinking of the health talk and thinking like, okay, maybe not that, maybe this, But so I try to make certain choices, but what happens is what's happening inside with that meal. And because metabolic health is on a continuum like other aspects of health. So Warren might be sitting here with his metabolic health. I might be further down the road, sitting worse off here. Someone else is sitting here. In terms of how is the body responding to the meal we just had. So if I give Jaden, who's fit and healthy, give Jaden a big bowl of pasta, and I give a male that's 75 years old with significant insulin resistance the same bowl of pasta, there's going to be a different physiological process that's happening between those two people with the same meal, exactly the same meal. And that's how metabolism is. What hormones are released, what inflammation is happening, and how do we bring that back towards a healthier physiology. So these are some of the things that indicate whether or not you're metabolically healthy. I want to touch on in some of the health talks, and we really are wanting to get to be more practical with our health talks now. We want to start doing some practical stuff as a church family, like we mentioned at the start of this process. But these are some parameters. There are certain blood tests you really should know about yourself, and especially if you're over 40, 45, 50, you really should. There should be tests you'd be doing on an annual basis to see how you're doing. And some of the simple ones are fasting blood glucose and insulin. That's really good to know. You want a fasting glucose to be less than about 5.5. An HbA1c. The HbA1c is an indicator of your glycemic control, your glucose control, over roughly the last 3 months. So if your blood sugar has been up and down for the last 3 months, one of the things that it does is sugar glycosylates, or it affects proteins negatively, and your hemoglobin is a protein. So when your blood sugar has been erratic, and the brain doesn't like erratic blood sugars, then it glycosylates your hemoglobin, and we can measure that in the blood by HbA1c. And you want to see an HbA1c that's less than 5.7. Then blood pressure, so when you have high insulin, it also causes changes in your blood vessels. So you get the middle part of the blood vessel gets hypertrophied and thickened, and that's called tunica media hypertrophy, and that can cause raised blood pressure. Triglycerides, if you do a lipid profile and you get a triglyceride level that's high, often it's an indicator of insulin resistance. So your lipid profile can very much give you a clue about what your insulin sensitivity is doing. And this is a large part of what this talk is about today. Because let me tell you, I'm talking about it today because it's relevant to all of us. And there's a lot of us that are having these problems, and that's why I'm talking about it. So a total cholesterol less than 5. LDL, which is the so-called bad cholesterol, less than 3, ideally. HDL greater than 1.2. So your lipid profile is reflecting what's happening with your glycemic control and your metabolism. This is important to understand. There are genetic causes of so-called familial hypercholesterolemias where you can have cholesterol profiles that are somewhat independent or to a degree independent of what's happening with your lifestyle, but most of them are lifestyle related. But today we're going to talk about what is insulin resistance. And the reason I'm talking about this is pandemic. Every second person has got problems with insulin resistance, and there are reasons for that. Essentially, insulin resistance is a condition of overstorage. You've got too much energy stored that you can't tap into and use. So most of us, when we get overweight, have got energy that can last us for days and sometimes weeks that we just can't access because of the hormonal milieu. That's important to understand. So, insulin, when you take a carbohydrate-containing meal, what's important to understand that the different components of our food, the fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, they cause a different hormonal response. When it comes to insulin, carbohydrates tend to cause the highest insulin spike, depending on the type of carb. There's different types of carbs. Proteins cause the next highest level of insulin release, and fats cause the least, in terms of how macronutrients affect hormonal release. But that said, which macronutrients have the highest calories per gram? Fat. So 1 gram of carbohydrate is roughly 4 calories, 1 gram of protein is 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. So not all calories are created equal, and so you need to see where the energy density is in terms of what you're taking into your body as well. So how does insulin work? Insulin, when I take a carbohydrate-containing meal, gets into my bloodstream. The body doesn't like a lot of glucose in the blood. It wants to get it into the tissues, and it wants to get it used. They say at any one time we're not supposed to have more than an average of about 1 teaspoon of glucose in our bloodstream at any one time. What happens over time, now we'll touch on it a few times to emphasize the point, but the combination of being sedentary, taking in too many calories, genetics play a role, and being inactive, like I said, sedentary. That combination makes your tissues more resistant to your own insulin, which means that when your glucose comes in, the pancreas releases insulin to get rid of the glucose. But because that tissue's seen so much insulin and it's got so much stored, it's like trying to push more stuff into a stuffed boot of a car that's already full. The cell is full of nutrients, and you're coming along and you keep saying more, 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 more. And so the body says no, and the receptor sensitivity to the insulin changes. This is important to understand. And if you understand this, you start to understand how to reverse it. And you understand why fasting works and why exercise works. So that's that. Insulin resistance arises when the nutrient storage pathways evolve to maximize efficient energy utilization or exposed to chronic energy surplus, taking in more calories than we use. Now, insulin sensitivity naturally changes as we age. So a 70-year-old will have more insulin resistance than a 25-year-old, naturally. But a lot of that is modifiable by what we're doing. This is too busy, but basically, it's just explaining the physiology. Therapies that decrease ectopic lipid storage and diminish macrophage-induced white adipose tissue lipolysis will reverse the root causes of type 2 diabetes. Basically, I'll show you what that's saying now. In most natural habitats, calorie availability is scarce and unpredictable. So in years gone by, most of us were working outside farming, digging in the ground, expending calories. Now we're sitting doing this. And we're eating calorie-dense meals that are nutrient poor, lots of calories, low in nutrients, and not using any of it. That's the perfect storm. And that's one of the main triggers of insulin resistance. Doing nothing, eating lots, and eating calorie-dense stuff. So what are the signs of a broken metabolism? How do you know if you're metabolically healthy? So we said you want to be musculoskeletally healthy, you want to be cardiovascularly healthy, and you want to be metabolically healthy. What are the signs of a broken metabolism? There's one. That's rather unappealing, but very easy to end up at. That's not normal. That's not normal, and it's become so usual that we think it's normal. And the point is, yes, it's not nice. It doesn't look nice, let's be honest, but it's what that means. This person is at major risk of cardiovascular disease, of heart attacks and strokes, of cancer. So basically, insulin is the major anabolic hormone of the body. Insulin is the thing that builds tissues up and stores things. The role of insulin is like a store manager. You give insulin something, it's going to store it. That's what insulin does. And it's going to make it grow. It's like petrol to a fire. So if you've got a little cancer cell starting in whatever tissue of your body, and you put lots of insulin on it, you're going to encourage cancer development. And then you're going to mess up your lipid profile, and you're going to increase cardiovascular risk, you're going to increase hypertension. So it's the collateral damage, and that's what's happening inside. You get this visceral fat formation. When your metabolism is broken, your body gets more and more glucose staying in the blood, and it has to make more and more insulin to pump it, try and get rid of it. And that's how insulin is packing and storing everything away as fat. Fat, 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 fat. So that's what you're trying to do with a boot analogy. You're trying to stuff more calories and more food into a boot that looks like that. And that never works. We've all tried it. And those are some of the consequences. So there's certain hormones that you want to keep high as you age, and there's certain hormones you want to keep low as you age. Insulin is one of the hormones you need to keep low as you age. Testosterone for guys is one of the hormones you want to keep up as you age. So that's what's happening there. Inside the cell, you've got this, what's called intramyocellular lipid. Because of this caloric excess, you're getting fat. So there's certain tissues, let me just come back to that. There's different types of glucose receptors in the body. Some are insulin dependent, in other words, they need insulin to do their job. Some are insulin independent. You'll notice the one in the brain. The brain is insulin independent. It's got a GLUT3 receptor. So when I eat a glucose-containing meal, that glucose can go straight through my blood-brain barrier into my brain where the neurons can use it for energy without needing insulin. But there are certain parts of the brain that are insulin dependent, things like some of the memory centers. And so that's why now some of the dementias like Alzheimer's, they're linking to type of diabetes, they're calling type 3 diabetes, because there are insulin receptors in the brain that are also affected by high levels of insulin and inflammation. So, but you look at that GLUT4. So GLUT4 is the main glucose receptor in skeletal muscle, in fat, and in the heart. And when you're insulin resistant in those tissues get full of fat, and then their insulin sensitivity is very poor, and that glucose stays in the blood, and it affects the rest of the system that causes collateral damage. So different GLUT receptors and different requirements for insulin. But that's what's happening. Inside the cell, you're getting this fat accumulation. And so in terms of what we call the pathophysiology of insulin resistance, the main thing that seems to be causing it is calorie density within the cell in the form of fat. And that fat is affecting how insulin signaling is happening and is causing a disconnect at the receptor. So part of the responsibility we have if we're struggling with insulin resistance is to get rid of that intramyocellular fat, to unblock. There's no good taking medicine that keeps pumping your insulin up, because insulin causes, this is what, unfortunately, most people don't do the lifestyle changes that are needed, and so they'll go to the doctor, and the doctor will say, well, your glucose is still high, I'm going to give you some insulin, after you've treated with oral hypoglycemic agents. But that's adding fuel to the fire, that's making the situation worse, because you're causing more and more collateral damage with the extra insulin. So that's that slide that shows you the different responses of the macronutrients to of insulin caused by the different macronutrients. And there's that scale that shows you where the calories are in different types of foods. So to be proactive, know your BMI. A healthy BMI is just a start. So a healthy BMI is roughly between 18 and 25. And every one of us must work towards having our ideal body composition. So the important thing is not so much your weight, which is important. The most important thing is how much of your body is fat, how much of your body is muscle, how much of your body is water. It's your body composition that really tells a lot about the health of your physiology and where that fat is stored. There's some fat that's good and necessary and some fat that's deadly. A visceral fat is deadly. It's very, very bad for your health. So body composition is key. I'm just going to show you next a video. It's a few minutes, but it's worth watching. It explains to you why some people, when they restrict their calories, they still don't lose weight. And this video explains it nicely, and it all has to do with insulin. Watch this, and I hope you can see it. Bram, will this video play sound as well? Let's try. Can I go? So this is a guy called Jason Fung. He's a diabetologist. He's a nephrologist, actually, but he's got an interest in type 2 diabetes. And he's been looking at fasting and how it impacts your metabolism and getting it back, essentially. Sorry, Brom. Let's see if we can solve that.
Sound options. Sound settings. To see where your sound's going. Output needs to go to the Black Magic. Okay.
I'm so glad you knew that. I didn't.
Going to lose weight, and that's the sort of calorie. Hi, this week we're going to talk about the science of weight loss and what I think is the most important thing you need to understand if you're going to lose weight, and that's the sort of calories view versus the hormonal view, how they're not actually different, and that the hormonal view is actually more comprehensive and thus more conducive to getting you to lose weight. And it's coming right up. So let's start with the energy balance equation. And this is body fat equals calories in minus calories out. And this is always true. This is what they say is the first law of thermodynamics. That is, you can't, this must always be true, and it is. What it doesn't mean is that cutting calories equals lower body fat, because there's actually 3 variables in this equation. If you lower calories, you can lower body fat, certainly, and it will balance, or you can lower calories out, and that will also balance. The other thing it doesn't say is that the hormones are not important. There's nothing in this equation that says hormones are irrelevant. And the third thing to note is that it means that there really is no such thing as a caloric deficit, because it's an equality. It equals that. It always has to balance. So we're going to explore what that means coming up. So let's think about how the body actually stores energy. So when you are feeding, you take in energy. So if you think about a coal burning power plant, for example, I've represented this. Put in that coal, the power plant can do one of 2 things with it. It can burn it for energy, or it can store it. And the important thing is that when the insulin is high, that is, you cannot take the energy from storage and burn it, because the arrows don't go that way. So the hormones are important because it tells the body which way the energy flows. When insulin is high, energy is going to flow either into storage, metabolism, which is burning, but it's not going to flow from storage into metabolism. So let's put that into the body's terms. So food energy is calories. That is what it is. Whenever you eat, insulin is going to go up, and you can store it either as sugar, which is called glycogen, or body fat, which is through the process of de novo lipogenesis. Or you can burn it, and that's through metabolism, and that's all the energy that the kidney and the brain and the heart needs. And there's exercise. Of the two, metabolism is far more than exercise. The number of exercise tends to be what you use to generate body heat and the rest of normal metabolism. Fasting, when you don't eat, insulin is going to go down. And when insulin goes down, what happens is that the arrow changes so that you can go from storage into burning. And you can only do that if insulin is low. So insulin, we say, inhibits lipolysis, which is just a fancy way. High insulin levels are going to stop fat. We store energy is through fat and glycogen. When we break it down, it's the process technically known as glycogenolysis and lipolysis. So let's look what happens if you want to lose weight. So if you do simple calorie restriction and you do a very low-fat diet and you eat 10 times a day, you're going to keep insulin levels high because every time you eat, insulin stays high. So let's to that.
Okay, I think I'll just comment on the rest
Fat
of it.
has 100,000 calories in storage.
Basically, what he's saying is that you can take 2,000 calories, and what people are doing is they've been told to cut 500 calories and just come down to a 1,500 calorie diet and you'll lose weight. The issue is, can you access the fat? Because the point is you're supposed to get the calories from the fat to lose the weight. You're never going to access your fat unless your insulin is low. And that's the point, is that some people, what he's saying is that most people have created a lifestyle where their insulin's so high all the time that just cutting calories will not allow you to tap into the fat that you're trying to burn, because insulin packs things away. It's a storage hormone. So you need to be cutting the calories in the face of a low insulin level. And that's what's important to understand and conceptualize. Because if you don't, all you're doing is, say you and I go 1,500 calories and your insulin's still high from eating those 1,500 calories multiple times through the day, then all your body's going to do, because of the law of thermodynamics, is drop your energy production, so you're going to feel lethargic and tired, and you'll survive on 1,500 calories a day, but you won't burn the fat. So you're just going to frustrate yourself. So this is important stuff to understand. So you need to get the insulin low. Energy is the basic currency we need to function at our best, including and especially at a brain level. We need to understand the science of energy production, and this is what we're trying to talk about today. To have abundant, vibrant energy, you need mitochondria. We're going to talk about the mitochondria coming up, and that's those mitochondria need energy in a certain form, and you need that to happen in a certain hormonal environment to be optimally energized. So metabolic flexibility. What is metabolic flexibility? And that's the title of this lecture. Metabolic flexibility simply means that your body's metabolism is flexible and can use whatever fuel is available to it. If I have to take you all now and do an experiment, 2 groups or 1 group even, just stop you eating and then feed you all the same meal. Sorry, not feed you all, stop you eating. Your body's responses to that absence of calories will be different. And some of you will feel terrible. Some of you will complain of lightheadedness, headaches, because you're not fat adapted. So a key message here is how you feel when you fast is a good indicator of your health of your metabolism. Because a metabolically flexible person is one who can switch rapidly between fuel sources. Okay, so he's not giving me any food. Now I'm going to use the glycogen that's stored in my liver or my muscles. Okay, that's finished. Now I'm going to switch to ketosis and burn fat. So when you your body will only burn fat when your insulin is low. I'm saying that several times, but it will only burn fat when your insulin is low. And a metabolically flexible person is a metabolically healthy person. That person can switch between fuel sources rapidly. I remember when I was studying as a student, I was working at Helderberg Hospital, I was studying with a German guy. And he said to me, he was just a visiting student, he said at the time, no, he's trained his body to like eat once a day or whatever. And that was like 15 years ago, whatever it was, before all this stuff was spoken about. And actually, that's what he had done. He had actually trained himself to be metabolically flexible, so he could stand and operate all day long and not be like, oh, like my cognition's gone and, I can't think and I'm hangry. And people that are hangry are metabolically inflexible because most of us have got enough fat to be energized when we don't eat if we're metabolically healthy. And so that's what my encouragement to you today is to understand metabolic flexibility, to understand that a metabolically healthy person can switch between fuel sources rapidly because they have the hormonal milieu that allows them to do that. And an acid test is how you feel when you fast. If you think your life's going to end when you fast, that's a bad sign. And yeah, I've been there. And so I'm trying to get to this, what I'm talking about. It's really important, and this is what I'm trying to share. So effectively, metabolic flexibility means getting metabolically unstuck. When you are metabolically unhealthy, you are stuck. Your calories are packed away and you can't access them. That's the danger. So you can be as fat as anything and still not be able to get energy, which is the paradox. You've got energy stored for days and you're just not accessing it. And so to get that, you have to do certain things, and we're going to finish on that. So metabolic flexibility benefits: sustained energy, fewer blood sugar roller coasters, fewer cravings, less hangry people, improved fat burning. When you're metabolically flexible, your body doesn't have to keep your food-seeking mechanisms constantly on. Instead, your body is able to burn whatever fuel is available, seamlessly sifting from one fuel source to another without you even noticing. Another acid test is tell somebody you're going to fast. See their eyes. Like, we're not going to have breakfast and lunch, and the panic that sets in. That tells us about how dependent we've become and how geared we are. So your body adapts to what you do the most. If you're predominantly eating rice for breakfast, lunch, and supper, you're in a carb-burning mode. Your mitochondria are used to seeing carbohydrates as their energy substrate. If you're including healthy fats like guacamole and a little bit of coconut oil and some vegetables, your body starts to learn to see the fuel sources from fats as the better source. And the idea is to be able to jump between the two. It's not that saying one's definitely better than the other. There's certain carbohydrates which are overtly bad. None of us should be eating refined carbohydrates. We know that. And it's all about moderation and stuff like that. But I'm saying those are bad carbohydrates. And in fact, we're going to get to another study which shows that if you cut a certain amount of calories from your diet from fats versus the same amount of calories from carbs, the people that cut exactly the same amount of calories but different from one from fat and one from carbs, actually those that cut it from fats lose more weight. So carbohydrates are not bad. It's the type of carbohydrate, the quantity, and the state of your physiology when you eat them. If you're sitting in terms of the carbohydrate spectrum, it's a continuum. If the question is, when you take, say, 75 grams of glucose, if I give you 75 grams of glucose and me 75 grams of glucose, the question is, how much insulin does my body have to produce to get rid of that glucose into the tissue? And if Paul's physiology produces X amount of insulin and mine produces 5X to get rid of the same amount of glucose, then I'm far more metabolically unhealthy, and I'm far more metabolically out at sea than Paul is, and I've got to do more work to get back over here. Does that make sense? So all of us in the room are sitting somewhere on this line today, and there are numbers that you can assess at the lab that can tell you where you're sitting on that line. And like I said, the important thing is what those numbers mean and the fact of what they mean for the rest of your physiology. But if you're sitting out here, you've got to do some fasting. You've got to come to this side. You've got to swing that pendulum right to the other side, exercise while you fasted, get rid of that fat source so that you can increase the sensitivity, drop the insulin, drop the calories while the insulin's low, and then come back to the middle of the road. Most of us are just sitting way out here, and it's too comfortable. Carbs are comfortable. They are. Carbs are not evil. Carbs are not bad. God made carbohydrates. He made healthy carbohydrates. We made unhealthy carbohydrates. Okay, so the ESCOM plant that can't do load shedding. We talk moving now gears. We've spoken about metabolic health, metabolic flexibility. This little organelle, I wax lyrical about it. I just love this organelle. It's so amazing. This is amazing. This is the mitochondrion. And every cell we have, whether it's a brain cell, a liver cell, a kidney cell, has these organelles to produce ATP. All your cells have functions they have to do, and those functions are dependent on having ATP as an energy source. If you don't have ATP, so what happens is, in that those mitochondria use oxygen as part of the ATP production process. So the reason we die, when we die, if someone stops my heart, the reason I die is because there's no oxygen getting to my cells. And the cell's machinery stops because there's no ATP. Does that make sense? So these organelles are producing ATP, and they are, if you want to have vitality, friends, this is the place to do your work. The science has moved its focus to the mitochondria. So they derive, you know, we are solar powered, we get our energy from the sun. The sun, radiant energy from the sun gets trapped in glucose bonds, and those glucose bonds are broken through the metabolic pathways, and they release energy when they're broken, and those energy from those bonds are used to create gradients that make ATP. That's how we run. And so this is glycolysis. This is what's called the citric acid cycle. Anybody that's done biochemistry or physiology will have been through the citric acid cycle. So the body takes the glucose, puts it through all these pathways, and you can see here, all those different names are not so important now, but see these molecules here, NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. That's a carrier for electrons. And so the body's taking these bonds that are broken, carrying that energy in the form of these carrier molecules and taking them to the final pathway, which is this. Now, this is where the magic happens. So it takes these bonds that have been broken, these electrons, and puts them onto these different complexes. So you'll see they're complex 1, complex 2, complex 3, and so they're passing these electrons down these chains. And whenever the energy is passed to these complexes, the complexes use that energy to pump hydrogen out of that membrane. And then that hydrogen is now, so this is inside the mitochondrion, is sitting in this space, and then it comes through the fifth complex. Because there's a gradient that's been created, it rushes through that fifth complex, and that makes the ATP from ADP. And that's how we make energy. And someone said that, I read an article the other day that says we make something like 10 billion ATP molecules per day in each cell, which is like mind-blowing. So you need to understand what makes your mitochondria sick. If you want to have energy and vitality, you need to look after your mitochondria. And if you're metabolically unhealthy, your mitochondria. So if you really want to have maximal energy, maximum drive, maximum capacity, you need a metabolism that's flexible, and you need healthy mitochondria. Those are the two things you really need. So why does it matter? I said these are some of the consequences. So these are some of the diseases that are labeled that people get, but their basis is actually insulin resistance. This is why it's so important. Polycystic ovarian disease is insulin resistance. Inflammation of the liver, they get this non-alcoholic steatohepatosis, or NASH, fatty liver disease. Because basically when the insulin's so high, the body's just packing all its stuff away, including in the liver cells. That's called NASH. Atherosclerosis, heartburn, low HDL, cirrhosis, constipation, hypertension, cardiomyopathy, elevated blood sugar, triglycerides. Those are some of the consequences of hyperinsulinemia. How do I get rid of this? You need a lower calorie diet and the right hormonal environment with a low insulin level to lose. What does that sound like? A low-calorie diet that's nutrient-dense, anti-inflammatory, and not hyperinsulinogenic. What diet does that sound like? Does it sound familiar? It's a plant-based diet. It's a plant-based diet. Animal products generally are very pro-inflammatory. So a plant-based diet by nature, who would have thought God knew best for what we need, hey? Gee, who would have thought? So nutrient-dense, calorie low. Whenever you sit down to eat, here's something to guide you. So all of us, we'll get to that. All of us are sitting on this carbohydrate tolerance spectrum. We're sitting somewhere on this line. Where are we? Some of the risk factors: a family history of type 2 diabetes, being inactive, having poor sleep. These are some of the risk factors for insulin resistance. I want to put to you this evening. Going to bed late is a really silly thing to do. If you're insulin resistant, if you have type 2 diabetes in your family, if you're overweight, if you have a sedentary job, everybody go to bed early. There's 24 hours in the day, whether you go to bed at 9 o'clock and get up at 3, or whether you go to get midnight and get up at 6, there's still 24 hours in the day. And the problem is, when we disobey what's best for us, we always have consequences. And insulin resistance is made worse by going to bed late. The later you go to bed, the more insulin resistant you become. So if you've got diabetes, bedtime early. And I know I'm not a parent, but I know with parents, sometimes you stay up as a parent once the kids have gone to bed because you get time to just be. I understand that. But you can still get up at 3 or 4 if you get to bed at 9 or 8. But so I'm at the moment, I've got a lot of work I've got to study. In the next 6 months, I've got to finish my final exams. And I'm working and I'm trying to do my master's, and I don't know where to get all the time. But I've been finding the last few mornings I've been getting up at 3:30 sometimes, and you get so much more work done at that time of the morning. You really do. It really works. So go to bed early. If you eat a lot of fast foods, what's the problem with fast foods? Why is it a problem? Yeah, it's calorie dense, nutrient poor. Recipe for weight gain. You're packing in calories, body's packing it away, and that's engendering insulin resistance. Refined sugar and flour, or a combination of these factors. These are some of the risk factors. Obesity leads to insulin resistance, with less evidence for relationship in the other direction, which is interesting. So fat that sits on your midriff, that's the bad fat. And that's where us guys often struggle. We get fat sitting here, and sitting between the intestines, because we sit too much, eat too calorie-dense foods, don't move enough. It sits here, and this causes insulin resistance. And that causes inflammation. So you don't have to be obese to have insulin resistance, and not all people who are obese have insulin resistance. So other factors, this is important to understand. Sometimes, and people that are very, accountable. They say that, because let me just say, it's not appropriate to look at a person that's overweight and say he's just a slob and he's lazy. It's not fair. You don't know. And the point is, for some people, weight loss is harder than others. And the reality is that there are genetics involved in insulin sensitivity, unfortunately. I want to just remind you today, we live 6,000 years after creation. Our genes are broken. There's a lot of things that are dysfunctional inside of us. It's amazing that we can still stand and function as we do with the kind of damage that the human genome has sustained. And medicine's now at a place where we actually can test, and this is the thing that fascinates me in healthcare, is that you can actually now, with the right testing, you can actually understand a person a whole lot better if you understand their genes. You can understand the diseases they're susceptible to. You can understand their mental health a whole lot better. You can understand their vulnerabilities like cancers. And there are genes that make you more predisposed to being insulin resistant. They're called the PPAR or gamma genes, for one. They are real. Priscilla doesn't believe me they're real, but they are. They affect insulin signaling. So it doesn't mean if you have those genes that you cannot lose weight. It means that you might have a harder time than others. It's still possible if you put these principles in place to lose weight. But some people have it harder. So be compassionate. Most people are trying. Most people don't want to be fat and overweight. And there are things that make it harder for some than others. So know your numbers. I spoke about these. These are some tests you should do on a regular basis, at least annually. Fasting glucose and insulin. HbA1c, lipogram, vitamin D3, your inflammatory level, homocysteine, B vitamin status, iron and omega-3s. Sleep and metabolic health, we've spoken about. When you sleep, snoring can be a problem. If you have sleep-disordered breathing, so sleep-disordered breathing is also a continuum. On the far right, you've got obstructive sleep apnea, where you actually interrupt your air supply, and your upper airway totally becomes blocked. On the far left is a person who doesn't snore at all. Most people snore. They don't like to think it, but most people do. And a small amount of snoring is not necessarily a problem. The problem comes is when it reaches this point where you become hypoxic and you get low levels of oxygen from your snoring. Because what happens then, the body wakes you up in micro doses and it sends out stress hormones. So when you become hypoxic at night, your body sends out catecholamines, it sends out adrenaline, it sends out cortisol. And those things can contribute to insulin resistance. So sometimes people's weight issues are caused by the obstructive sleep apnea. That's important to understand. So sleeping early lessens your chance of insulin resistance and making sure that you're breathing properly at night. If you think that you are snoring excessively or that you're obstructing, you need to have a sleep study done because obstructive sleep apnea is very, very dangerous. So what do we do about this? Now so the problem we've conceptualized, we're nearly finished. We're coming into land. The problem is that there's all this energy that's stored, and the problem is one of accessing it. So how do we fix this? Well, we've got to use it. We've got to unblock the blockage. So how do you think you're going to unblock the blockage? You're going to fast. You're going to exercise while you fasted. The science is now showing that exercising while you fasted is like one of the best things you can do to, improve your insulin sensitivity and reverse some of these conditions. So you want to get that fat out of the adipose tissue. You want to get the fat out of the muscles. Then time-restricted feeding. Most of us, like if I look at my work, most of the day, I walk around a lot, but I sit a lot as well, sitting at a machine. And so most of us are sedentary. Most of us don't need 3 meals a day. We think we do. We really don't. So try and eat 2 meals a day. Try and eat within, the time-restricted feeding is very topical, eating intermittent fasting. So that, if you can eat within a 6 to 8 hour window, you're forcing your body to fast for another 16 hours of that day. And then it doesn't mean that you must eat Cocoa Pops and milkshake during those 8 hours, because you want to keep your insulin low during those hours. But the time-restricted feeding is going to drop your insulin. So fasting does a couple of things. It drops your insulin, number one. It increases your insulin sensitivity. It's anti-inflammatory, all right? It allows the inflammation level in the body to come down. These are perfect situations to improve your insulin sensitivity. And then the more you do it, the more your body gets used to burning fat in a low insulin environment. And you start to feel better going longer periods without food. So that's part of what it takes to reverse it. So stop storing and start using. Send the storage manager, which is insulin, on a long vacation. The insulin, most of our pancreases are like overworked. They're like totally fatigued. They've been pumping out insulin forever to try and compensate for this caloric excess, this carb excess, this refined carb excess. And then there are other hormones. So in terms of looking at hormonal influences on weight and metabolism and health, there are a number of hormones that affect your metabolic health. Insulin is the basal hormone. When we correct hormones, you want to do so in a hierarchical fashion. The first hormone to correct is insulin. The next thing to look at is your adrenal glands. The next thing is progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, thyroid function, growth hormone. So the hormones interact as a symphony. It's no good identifying one and treating one hormonal imbalance. They work as a symphony because the basal hormones in that pyramid I just described affect the apical hormone functions. So thyroid hormone is affected by what's happening in my adrenal glands. Insulin's affecting my adrenal glands, etc., etc. So that most important one is insulin at the bottom, which starts the whole process. So get your insulin under control, and then sequentially you can look at others if you're aged, if you're getting older, if you're menopausal, if you're having symptoms of testosterone deficiency as a guy. But if you're eating properly and you get your insulin under control and you're exercising, keeping your muscle mass up, the likelihood of having a testosterone deficiency is way, way less. But that's just to emphasize the other hormonal influences. So exercise and fast. Time-restricted feeding. That shows the impact of different types of foods. You can have those are all 500 calories. As you can see, if you have your calories from fruit and vegetables, your stomach's going to be fuller. You're going to be more satiated because you feel there's more fiber, but there's fewer calories, the same amount of calories. So the type of food you eat, so cheese is a very calorie-dense food. It's high in saturated fat. And it will satiate you, but there's lots of calories in that. It's not going to stretch your stomach. So, low calorie, high nutrient, healthy plant-based fats. So the healthy plant-based fats are avocado, coconut oil, a little bit of olive oil. But now bear in mind, there's no olive oil plant. There's an olive tree. So get the olives. You can have a little bit of olive oil, but don't go like this with the olive oil and shake it like this, because that's lots of calories. And it's lots of calories. It's separated from the rest of the olive. Think about how many olives it takes to make a liter of olive oil. How many are you thinking? It's not a small amount. And that's lots of calories. So try and get foods in their whole food sources. So how do you want your metabolism to be, to finish off? Glucose comes in slowly and in low amounts. So you eat a meal, the glucose enters from the gut, the pancreas sees there's some glucose coming in, releases a small amount, poof, puff of insulin, the glucose disappears into the cell. Metabolism, and is acting on healthy mitochondria. That's what you want. When you are insulin resistant, the glucose comes in, the pancreas sees it, pumps out insulin, but there's a blockage. So glucose is staying in the blood, pumps out more insulin, more insulin, more insulin. Inflammation, oxidative stress, damage to the blood vessels because the glucose is staying high, damage to your eyes and kidneys. That's not how you want it. So here's a list. When you sit down for a meal and you want to plan something, see if it ticks. This is from Michael Greger's work. If you want to read a guy that's really, in my opinion, the best in terms of the evidence for plant-based eating is Michael Greger. Michael Greger and Neil Barnard are two of the really good ones to read. And he came up with this list. He looked through all the science, and he's saying this is the kind of thing you want your meals tick boxes to tick when you're eating food. Is it anti-inflammatory? Is it clean? Is it high in fiber? Is it low glycemic? Is it not addictive? Is it low in added fats, low in sugar, not calorically dense? No, it's plant-based. Low in refined grains, low in salt. Most of us are eating too much salt. Most of us are eating way too much salt. Most of us are getting more than enough sodium from our diet, naturally. We don't get enough potassium. We need to increase the amount of potassium in the diet. Microbiome is good for the microbiome. Fruits and vegetables, legumes, satiating. So for breakfast, this sounds weird, but if you're trying to get your glucose under control, take a percent of baked beans, wash the baked beans. This is what I do sometimes now, and I find it carries you through the morning. I wash the sauce off, because that sauce is full of sugar. I pour the sauce out, I put it in a colander, I rinse the sauce off, then I put like paprika and garlic powder, onion powder on it, and a little bit of olive oil, lightly heat it, put that on something like whole grain brown rice or something or other. That will carry you. It's fiber rich. It's not calorie dense if you haven't put 3 liters of olive oil over it. This is just an example. But don't compensate with extra oils and too many of the extra oils, because that's where the calorie density comes in. So it turns out that the healthiest diet also appears to be the most effective diet for weight loss. And that's that study I quoted. So yeah, some of us start looking like that, but you don't end up that way. But this guy's got very little body fat. That's because he's insulin sensitive. And that doesn't mean he's healthy though. Remember what we said in the beginning. He's musculoskeletally impressive. What has he done to get to look like that? Has he eaten a kilogram of chicken for breakfast? And, what's he done? That doesn't mean he's necessarily healthy. But body fat percentage, your body composition is important to understand. So I know we're nearly out of time, but I really want to touch on the mitochondria. So mitochondria are these energy organelles that either tell you they are either producing energy or they go into what's called cell defense mode. Your mitochondria want to make you energetic. When there are stresses in the body, whether it's inflammation, toxins, or anything like that, this is the new mitochondrial science. The mitochondrial shift from this energy-producing mode to a cell defense mode. So if I've got chronic gut issues or inflammation or anything, my mitochondria are acting as sensors that are assessing my internal environment. And they shift to a cell defense mode when there's excess chronic stress, so you won't be energetic. So the argument of this guy who put this work forward is that if you spend time improving your mitochondrial health, you actually build your resilience. So you can tolerate a lot more, not that you should put your body under abuse, but you can tolerate a lot more abuse if you've strengthened your mitochondria, because they are responding to the total body stress load. So look at this. Between the ages of 40 and 70, typically people lose half their mitochondrial capacity, the capacity to produce energy. So how do you think you'll feel if you've got half your mitochondria that are switched off? And this is what's happening to many of us. Inflammation, So what is hormesis? Hormesis is the process by which a mild or acute stressor increases resistance to other stresses, increases the health, resilience, and vitality of the organism. Basically saying a small amount of what in large amounts would kill you is good for you. A little bit of cold showers are good for you. If you stand in the Atlantic like the people, unfortunately, on the Titanic, they died because of the prolonged exposure. But if you have a small dose of a cold shower every morning, it actually gets your mitochondria to upregulate and up their game. That's an example of hormesis. Fasting is a type of hormesis. It's uncomfortable when you start it, but it gets the body to say, listen, I need to raise my bar. There's adversity. So the problem with modern life is we've all become too comfortable. We think that the goal of life is to be able to sit on the couch with the remote, pizza, and this is the sum total of what it means to be successful. To create the ultimate comfort is our definition. And that comfort is killing us because the body needs a little bit of stressor to stay active and alive and vital. And that's what's happening at the mitochondrial level. So the different types of hormesis. Infrared saunas are very good for you. Fasting is good for you. Cold showers, like I said, we've been spoke about this at the men's camp. A lot of the guys are doing cold showers. And with the cold showers, it's winter now. Now, let me tell you, it takes bravery. Warren and I joke about it a lot. But I mean, I start with a hot shower. I do everything, wash nicely with my hot shower, and then you put your hand on there, and you're nice and warm by that stage. You don't have to start with a cold shower, and then put it off, put it cold. You can start with a little in between and then go full. And I promise you'll feel like $1 million. Just try it. As long as you haven't got some major cardiac defect or something like that that you're going to keel over, just try it. It's unreal how good you feel. Since I've been trying these little things, I've felt such a difference. I really have. In the morning, how you feel in the morning, it's just incredible. And that's one thing. It's just one thing. So we live in the age of anti-hormesis, trying to be comfortable. That guy's not having any hormetic stress at all. If you want a longer life, better health, more resilience, then using hormesis on a regular basis is crucial. So these are some supplements that potentiate your mitochondrial function. So we're saying healthy metabolism first, then healthy mitochondria if you want energy. Acetyl L-carnitine or L-carnitine, alpha-lipoic acid, coenzyme Q10, NAC, resveratrol, phospholipids, and PQQ. Those are some supplements. There are a number of others that actually boost your mitochondrial function and increase the capacity of your mitochondria to regenerate. And if you combine that with hormetic stress and a healthy metabolism, you're on a good path, a really good path. Last thing to talk about, circadian dyssynchrony. If you want to be healthy, if you want to have energy, you need to respect the light levels that control your physiology. So most of us, the science is suggesting we have circadian dyssynchrony. We live under fluorescent lights. These fluorescent lights, these are more yellow, but I mean, these things are producing blue light. And that's telling my brain and yours that it's 8 o'clock in the morning the whole day long. And so our brains work on light levels. And we suppose, this sounds airy-fairy, but it's not, it's science-backed. Your eyes are sensing the spectrum of light that you're exposing them to through the course of the day. In the early morning, blue light dominates when the sun rises, and you're supposed to get light into the eye. That's the first thing, is get light exposure early in the morning as far as you can. That early morning sun exposure resets your circadian clock. And then the spectrum of light changes as the sun changes its course through the course of the day, and towards the end of the day, it's more infrared. And that infrared light signals to the brain that things are now changing, you can get towards more sleep. And so what do? We come home, we put lights on, we watch TV, which is still blue light, And they've shown that a lot of mitochondrial dysfunction, because mitochondrial regeneration happens during proper sleep. So if you want to look after your mitochondria, you need to engage in circadian resynchronization. This is not rocket science. This is just doing what we're made to do. So most of us need to do some work at night. That's the reality of life. But put as many lights off at night as possible. So have your lighting low in the ground, have yellow lighting, not blue lighting. Put as much light off as possible, not lots of lights. And then if you need to, always use your blue blockers on your phones. If you use a screen, use the blue blocker on full. And then some of these specs can be really helpful. I bought a pair of these a while back for work at night. And I must say, as I've been using them as well, you sleep a whole lot better. Hey? So this is not weird science. This is real science. These are called twilight glasses because they cut out that blue light. And they're exposing your brain to the infrared light that you need to resynchronize your circadian clock. So exercise fast, keep your insulin low, sleep early and deeply without sleep-disordered breathing, cut calories from fat mostly, no refined or fast-releasing carbs, whole food carbs. You want to keep firing on all cylinders, and hopefully that's you at the end. Thanks for listening. I hope that was helpful. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask, or are you just overwhelmed, you want to sleep? But I want to challenge you to actually do this. Like, there's many people here that don't have any weight issues, which I want to congratulate you. That's fantastic. But I'm saying most of us need to improve our metabolism. And so do these things. Eat twice a day. Exercise in the morning. Do the little things. It's the accumulation of little things. Sorry, Lydney.
What you said about going to bed early.
Yeah.
Is it fine if you go to bed late and wake up late? Are you talking about the time of evening that you go to sleep, or are you talking about the duration?
Yeah, so the science seems to suggest that going to bed earlier does have a better physiological impact than going to bed after midnight. In fact, they did a study that showed that those that went to bed after midnight had worse insulin sensitivity than those who didn't. So the point is you should be basing your physiology on normal light levels that are happening outside, and that would mean going to bed earlier and getting up earlier. So yes, the duration of sleep makes a massive difference, but the timing of that sleep also makes a difference. And they did an experiment as well. There's some people that just say, listen, I'm a night owl. I go to bed late, and actually it's not true. They took those so-called night owls, they took them on an experiment, they put them on a camp somewhere in the middle of nowhere where there was no external false lights. And within the space of 3 or 4 days or something, they were all sleeping by 7 or 8 o'clock in the night because the environment had changed. And that's how we designed. So the reality is that most of us have to do some work at night, especially if you're a student, but you need to control your environment optimally and get to bed early and get up early and study in the morning. It just really does make a difference. Pastor.
Can you say something about the feeling of hunger?
Yes.
Because what you have explained here that we have two sources of energy.
Yes.
We have what we put in, and we also have what we have already reserved inside.
Yeah.
But even when we have that reserved energy, we feel hungry, and so we chase after some more food, when actually we could switch to what we have.
Exactly, and that's exactly right. So there's a number of hormones that control feelings of hunger. The hypothalamus is the area in the brain that mainly senses hunger and what's happening with your glucose levels. But there's things like leptin, adiponectin, things that are released by fat, insulin itself. Most of the time, hunger means one of a couple of things. It can mean that you've got such bad insulin dysregulation that so I find, now we all cheat, we're all human. I admit that I cheat, and I'm trying to be better, and that's why I'm giving these talks as well. But the point is, if I cheat at night, if you go to bed eating ice cream and chocolate sauce, and then you go to sleep, I'm hungrier that next morning than if I had a handful of nuts or some healthy legumes on some crackers, healthy crackers or something like that. So your hormones are affecting your hunger signals. The composition of what you had for your last meal is affecting your hunger. So that whole milieu will shift when you get the composition right and you get your sensitivity back. So when your insulin's too high and you have leptin resistance and your metabolism's out of sync, you're going to be hungrier, or you haven't balanced your macronutrients adequately at the previous meal. So you haven't had enough slow-releasing carbs or enough healthy fat, or the composition of your last meal wasn't adequate to carry you. Or you're in the process of restoring your insulin sensitivity and you have to go through discomfort to get to that sweet spot. But Pastor, your weight, you're very unlikely to be insulin resistant. But what I'm saying is, if you are insulin resistant, it takes a bit of effort and discomfort to get to the other side. And that's what most of us don't want to go through. We don't want to be uncomfortable. So the first sign of hunger, we think, oh, my throat's cut, I'm going to die, and I'm going to eat KFC or whatever, So hunger is a signal that you're getting. It doesn't necessarily mean doom and disaster. It can be part of the process of getting to the other side. But you need to ask, what was the composition of my last meal? What are my hormone levels doing currently? Am I insulin resistant? Is this part of the process of getting better? Or do I need to change the composition of my diet?
Yeah, but what I want to know is that why would we feel less hungry when the body can draw from what is already reserved?
Yeah, so if your body's able to draw, then it's got that fuel source that's accessible. You'll feel hungry if you can't access that source. So if your insulin is so high that you, like I said with that video, if your insulin is so high that you can't access the fat, then you're going to be hungry because there's no fuel source for the brain. So the brain must either get fuel from fat or fuel from carbohydrate. And if you can't access that stored fat, then you're going to have hunger symptoms as well. So that's the issue. But the point is, there's a process of discomfort to get to the other side, but you're very unlikely to be there. Coffee. Yeah. So I don't believe we need coffee. So very topical at the moment is bulletproof coffee. Where they make this high-fat coffee. So people have now gone to ketosis. So humanity battles to find the middle of the road. There's high-carb eating, and then there's full ketosis, and there's a spectrum in between. And so how a lot of this topic of time-restricted feeding got started is people got onto this ketogenic diet. And the argument is that if you're doing the things that I was trying to address in the talk, you don't have to be fully ketotic the whole time to get metabolic health back. Ketosis can be a great way of jump-starting the process. This is important to understand. And coffee comes into... So to answer your question, you don't need coffee to get you there. Coffee is like, for me, it's like cashing a check you haven't earned. It's pushing buttons that to get a desired effect without paying for the meal. And so we don't need it. It's artificial, but half the world doesn't function without coffee, and that's a bad sign. So, and that's reflective of a defective energy system. And if you fix these issues and you fix the mitochondria, you won't need coffee. Guaranteed, you won't. You fix your metabolic health and you fix your mitochondrial function, you won't need coffee at all. You'll sleep better and you'll have energy.
Thank you. My question is on supplements.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few supplements in your presentation. Thank you. You mentioned a few supplements in your presentation. How do I know which supplements I need? Because according to your first slides, it would be quite expensive for me to check all those issues that you talked about, to check maybe every year, and then I have to know which ones I'm missing. So on supplements, we do have those that are chemically done, and then those that are, those that are organic.
Yeah.
So what do we need those? Because our diet is not all the time balanced, and we find that we miss a lot of things.
Exactly.
Should supplements be on the top of our, the top of our balance?
Yeah.
Yes, whatever we need in our daily living.
Yeah, great question. So I believe there's a place for individualized supplementation. So that's my statement on that. Supplements are not designed to take the place of something I'm refusing to do. If I'm diabetic and I want to eat pizza tonight and all my dessert and not exercise, and then I want a supplement to do it, then I'm missing the point entirely. Supplements, the place for me is right at the apex. They're not at the base. So fix the lifestyle, put the principles in place that you can. Eat plant-based, eat anti-inflammatory, low-calorie, nutrient-dense, fast, eat twice a day, move, exercise while you're moving, while you're fasting, and then, fix the things that are fixable lifestyle-wise. Then, if you can do individualized testing, that's a great way to go about it because it takes the guesswork out of it. So individualized testing, then supplements, so on top of the food, and if necessary, still after that, medication. So that's the ascending hierarchy of therapy as I believe it should be practiced. So, and the nice thing about it now is that a lot of these tests, there are ways of assessing what your body's nutrient needs are. So you can test the urine, you can test various organic acids that tell you whether or not you need extra magnesium or whatever in various parts of your citric acid cycle. So that is possible. They haven't yet got to the point of assessing exactly what your mitochondria need, as far as I'm aware. So those nutrients that I mentioned, those are a generic mitochondrial type package. Those are good things to sort of try and tick off when you're trying to optimize your mitochondria. They will help your hormetic efforts and all the other things you're trying to do. But they're more like a generic approach. And there are supplements that fall into that category, but supplements must always be on the back of lifestyle change. That's how I see it. If you're just buying supplements and doing nothing, you're wasting your money. You're not wasting your money, but you're missing the point. Missing the point.
You referred to having 2 meals per day, and my question is, if you had to have, say, breakfast around 11 or 12, which has a good composition in terms of nutrients in your plate, and you'll have probably your brown things and vegetables, and you're full the whole day, do you really need that second meal?
Exactly, fantastic. If you can go 1 meal a day, but the issue is you want to make sure you're getting all the nutrients you need. And so if you're going to go on a 1 meal a day approach, it's not for everybody, but I'm saying you need to make sure that you're ticking off some of the nutrient needs that you might otherwise get across 2 meals. So it's hard to get all your fruits and all your vegetables in 1 meal. You know what I'm trying to say? So that's why it's 2 meals a day kind of makes sense, because at the 1 meal you can get a little bit more fruit, and the 1 meal you can get more vegetables. But if you are, there's certain nutrients you want to tick off and make sure you're covering. Things like B complex, vitamin D, vitamin C, enough zinc, copper, magnesium, a couple of nutrients that you can tick off. But so 1 meal a day is a real feasible option, especially if you're trying to lose weight. It's called OMAD. But you must make sure you're getting your nutrient needs in that meal. Essentially.
And then is it unhealthy not to have sugar at all?
Is it unhealthy? It's
someone said, because I don't take sugar at all, that's unhealthy.
Whew. Show me that person. So sugar is poison. Refined sugar is poison. We've taken sugar cane, we've stripped away all the stuff that God made, and we put that in our stuff. Your body responds very poorly to refined sugar. It's pro-inflammatory, it sends your insulin spiking, engenders insulin resistance, packs away fat, does nothing good for you. So we need to get rid of the sweet tooth and replace it with other things. Yeah. Paul.
Hello. I think Scott also wanted to ask a question just now, but Bruce, we generally are nutrient starved and calorie overloaded, and I think we eat too much to try and get more nutrients, the correct nutrients. What's the best way to get much more nutrients? Because even the ground nowadays is starved of nutrients.
Exactly.
And I know juicing and all of that, but with that comes some degree of
Glycemic
calories.
issues. Yeah.
Powders.
Yeah.
Made of powders, you add them. What would you suggest?
Sorry, I'll get to you now. Yeah, I absolutely agree, Paul. So I think trying to balance those 2 meals as best as one can in terms of the colors and the stuff that we know is nutrient dense. Like with the second meal, make sure you've got colored leaves and green leaves and things like that, and the reds and the yellows and all of those things, those phytonutrients and phytochemicals. So it's saying balancing those 2 meals as best you can with the components that are nutrient dense and not calorie dense. And then on top of that, like I say, individualized supplementation. I really believe that I must be honest, I've sort of been researching this area for a long time. When I started, I had like every single supplement on my shelf, and you can waste a lot of money. There's a lot of stuff you don't really need to buy, but the more I've read, Priscilla doesn't believe me, but my shelf has actually gotten smaller. But it's exciting to experiment on yourself in a healthy way to add to the vitality, you know. And it's an exciting science. So to answer Paul's question is do the best you can with each meal, supplement individually, and test where you can, and cover certain key bases. And perhaps at another talk we can talk about some of the other nutrients that one should add and check. But, sorry? Raw. That's another good one. So some things are a lot better delivered in a raw state. There are some anti-nutrients in raw foods too. That's not a major deal, but some foods are far better eaten raw than they are cooked. So think about whatever you can incorporate fresh and raw at each meal is a good idea as well. It's also going to be nutrient dense and calorie low. So if a food is high in water content and high in nutrients and low in calories, that's your win. Like, it's really a great idea to start the second meal with a massive salad. If you have a proper salad that's full of colors, like Paul makes a massive salad, which I love. If you make a really nice salad, lots of colors, I mean, that's the basis of your meal. You know, you don't need 5 kilograms of potato mash after you've had a decent salad, and a lentil stew and a lentil patty, or, you know, or cashew nut butter on it, whatever, cashew nut sauce or gravy, but not liters of olive oil and drenched. And, you know, we roast stuff, and then you look at the frying pan, and it's just like this orange goo and oil that's swimming, and that's calories. So we need oil from the plant. Yeah, anyway.
I just wanted to respond to Paul in terms of acquisition of nutrient-dense foods. I'm not sure if people are familiar with microgreens. I do that quite actively, and it's a great way to grow microgreens. It's approximately 7 to 10 days to grow the seeds to microgreens, and you can effectively produce a significant diversity of nutrients in a very short space of time.
Yeah, that's excellent. Absolutely.
So if people are interested, I'm happy to discuss that, you know, how to get into microgreens growing in your house under, you know, any conditions throughout the entire year.
Yeah, it is Russell, isn't it?
Yes.
Thanks, Russell. Appreciate that. Absolutely true. So sprouted stuff, sprouted greens, alfalfa, bean sprouts, those things are nutrient dense. They're full of enzymes. Great food to eat. Superfoods, exactly. Superfoods. Sorry, it was Scott, was it? Sorry.
Yeah, I had a question about the leptin cycle.
Yeah, the leptins.
Yeah, I've tried this 1 meal a day routine. It's funny, before I get through half the plate, I don't feel hungry anymore.
So what is the composition of that plate now? How are you balancing your plate?
It's actually unbalanced, and I still have these cravings, and then the hunger, I just feel full, and I just push the plate away. Is that a metabolic problem or a leptin satiation hormone?
So you're saying you feel hungry before you finished your plate?
I feel full before I finish the plate.
And you haven't had any surgery or anything like that? No. Yeah, no, one shouldn't really, but so you're eating 1 meal a day?
Yeah. Okay. Usually at night, and
is it calorically dense though? Is it calorically dense food?
It's potatoes.
Yeah. So if you
rice, just the normal.
So yeah, I mean, it also depends on your activity levels during the course of the day and what the rest of your physiology is doing, what your insulin's doing, what your inflammation's doing. So all of those hormones, leptin and insulin, adiponectin. When you get the metabolism right, that hormonal milieu changes favorably together. So doing the right things gets that environment sorted out. So it's not like we have to think like, what am I going to eat now that's going to fix my leptin, or what's going to fix my insulin? Or when you do the right things consistently, then those things come together correctly on their own. But it's it's really about making if you haven't tested, it's a good idea to test to see what your insulin and glucose are doing, what your resistance is doing, but to balance the meal appropriately, making sure you're starting with plant-based foods that are color-based, high fiber, water, rich. Start with the good stuff, and there's less space for the other stuff, the dense stuff. You know, if you eat a full plate of salad, you just don't have space for half a kg of pasta. You know. Cool. Thank you so much. I wish everyone best. Oh, sorry? Oh, Priscilla says I must tell you not to stop your insulin, which is not what I said. But so insulin for a type 1 diabetic is life-saving. Insulin for a type 2 diabetic in excess means that you're failing. Unfortunately, it does. It doesn't mean, I'm not saying you must stop it. I'm saying if you put these principles into place, you can reverse that process. You can reverse type 2 diabetes. This is the great news. And people at Be Free are doing it all the time. Well, they've done it often, from what I've heard. So, yeah, insulin can be life-saving in the right context, but it is part of the problem in the wrong context.
Sorry, can you replace honey for sugar?
With?
Remove sugar, you put honey.
Yeah, so honey is still a refined product. There's no honey tree. The bees have worked hard to get it all there. You know, it's still going to be require a lot of insulin to get rid of it. Obviously, dose dependent, frequency dependent. It's not like it's evil. It's about quantities and duration, but it's a refined product. It's fructose. So, and fructose actually is one of the worst things for insulin resistance. Too much fructose. I'm not saying honey, but honey has a bit of fructose in it. But pure fructose is very insulinogenic. It engenders insulin resistance. So it's better to sequentially, over time, lessen our need for sweeteners. And they say that even artificial sweeteners, like these acesulfame Ks and Nutrulose and sucralose, they're also not the best thing, because they can actually affect your metabolism, which is rather odd, because it's not a carbohydrate source, but they do. Yeah, cool.
So what about eating fruits if it's full of fructose?
So the good thing about fruit is that it's...
Is it because it's a fiber?
Sorry. Oh, repeat the question, sorry. The question is, what about fruit? So fruit, I believe, was made by God as part of our original diet. Fruit has got lots of nutrients in it, and it is the fiber content and the water content. So if you're going to take 10 apples and juice them and throw away the fiber and drink that, you're going to have a fundamentally different response to eating 2 apples or eating 10 apples. You're not going to be able to eat 10 apples for a start because of the fiber. So it's what we do. And it's if you're just going to have fruit, you won't have as favorable effect on your glucose profile as if you eat it with other things. So the point is, if you have it with like a bowl of oats or something, it's going to have less of an impact on your glucose profile than eating it alone. But the point is, fruit itself doesn't cause insulin resistance. That's important to understand. Fruit is good for you because of the fact that it's a whole food. It's not extracted, and it's fiber-rich.
Just as a principle, Bruce, I think you highlighted it in the beginning, that spikes is what we want to avoid.
Exactly.
Both insulin and sugar.
Exactly.
The insulin goes up.
Yep.
Sugar, and you want to slow to
That's it.
and fruit used in the right quantities in the right packaging does it.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think that's the goal. So honey's not, but if you eat honey on its own and quite a lot, you're going to get the spark. But
Yeah.
eating a little bit of honey with fiber, etc., you'd probably be all right.
Exactly.
Having a good breakfast.
I realize when I eat a lot of fruits, I don't lose weight at all.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. It also does. Sorry. So the comment was, when she eats a lot of fruit, she doesn't lose weight. It also depends on where you're at, where you're starting at. If you're starting out here with insulin resistance and a system that's not responding well, then your body's going to respond differently to a certain diet than somebody else's. But the point is, a plant-based diet is the basic diet that is good for everybody in terms of its components. But if you're way out there, you might want to go a little bit there for a while to get back here. That's what I'm trying to say. You need to see where you're at with testing and then choose something that's right for you. But remember that insulin's not the only hormone that causes weight problems. It's, like I said, there's thyroid hormone, there's all the others, but this is the main one at the base.
But I also think it depends on what kind of fruit you eat, because if you eat bananas or pawpaw, it's 2 different things.
Exactly,
you know?
exactly. So some fruits have a lot more sugar and release it quicker than others in terms of the glycemic index and the glycemic load. So berries, things like blueberries and raspberries, are low down on the low glycemic load side, whereas a banana or a sweet mango has got more sugar. But the point is, it's still packaged with fiber and stuff that the way God grew it. And the other thing is that I also think man has manipulated fruit and manipulated a lot of vegetables, that we're genetically controlling things to be sweeter and more sugar content because we're so addicted to sweetness as well. So that's also a factor. But the point is, fiber and the composition of what you're eating with that makes a difference to how your body responds to it.
Is it true that you should eat your fruits only in the morning, first thing in the morning, and never after meal or in the evening?
I don't know if I have a firm answer to that, but the point is it's better to not eat things that are going to cause a greater tendency for sugar destabilization or unstable blood sugars in the evening. It's better to eat something that's going to keep your glucose nice and well controlled so that you're not spiking your insulin at night while you're trying to sleep and those kind of things. So you mustn't eat anything with faster releasing sugars at night.
The fruit will do that.
Again, not like if you're taking dessert or something like that. It's not the same thing.
Maybe I can just comment, Bruce.
Yeah.
A fruit gets digested relatively quickly. It's one of the quickest, and God's packaged that. So if you really need something at night, a small portion of fruit is probably better than any carbohydrate or protein-based meal, because it's going to not interfere with your sleeping. It's going to be gone quicker, and it shouldn't spike you if you're healthy. Spike your sugar if you're healthy and you got a good metabolism. Otherwise, you should be fasting, and cutting back on the calories and basically your whole presentation this afternoon.
Yeah.
So 2 meals a day, or even one, whatever your situation is. Not a late meal, and fruit late or closer to bedtime if you really must have something.
Yeah. But the point is, if you're metabolically healthy, your body can process plant-based foods healthily. That's the bottom line. And there might be a period when you're trying to. Michael Grieger looked at this issue with fruit on his website, and he says categorically that fruit has not been shown to cause insulin resistance. So I must put that out there, and that's based on science. But the point is, if you're trying to get back to this side, you might be a bit more strict initially to get here so that you can come back here. But fruit is not the cause of insulin resistance. You might be trying to cut your glucose and carbohydrate content initially while you're trying to get here, but that's not the cause. The cause is caloric excess. And most fruits have a high water content, and they're calorically lower. There are more calories in fruit than there are in vegetables because of the sugar content, but they're still, most of them are fairly low carbohydrate content, depending on the fruit. There are some that are higher, if that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Bruce, just close it.
Oh, yeah, please. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, thank you so much for the information that we have access to these days. And I pray, Lord, that you'd help us to make the best choices we can. We want to be healthy so that we can serve you and each other. And I pray that you would help us to make those choices and help us to be examples of what you intended for us to experience. We pray in your name. Amen.